Then on Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview of this offseason, and it's going to be over the Georgia Bulldogs, the defending national champions of the 2021 season. And this team had an outstanding season in 2021, to say the least. National champions plus, the amount of talent that was on this roster last season, a national title was well-deserved. So huge credit to the Bulldogs, but how this team be in 2022 is what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players that this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with some notable games from last season. And obviously there were a lot of them. This team was 14-1, and once again, just an outstanding season for the Bulldogs, being your national champions. They beat Arkansas 37-0 back in October. That was a huge win, and that's really what showed the world that Georgia was a for-real team. And Arkansas at the time, by the way, this was a football team that was in the top 10, and they were on a hot streak heading into that game. So to beat them 37-0 was a huge win for Georgia. Also beat up Auburn 34-10, beat Kentucky 30-13, beat Tennessee 41-17. And if you look at those games and plus the rest of the games on this regular season schedule for Georgia, this team was extremely dominant the entire regular season. It was pretty outstanding what this team was doing. And they were the clear favorite going into the college football playoff to win. Actually, I'd say because, of course, they lost the SEC championship game to Alabama, they ended up dropping down to number 3 for the college football playoff. But, looking at the regular season, this team was just as dominant as they were. They were definitely a very dangerous team, we knew for sure, going into the playoff. First 7 games, they were 7-0. Last 8, they were 7-1. Their one loss of the season, once again, was to the Crimson Tide in the SEC championship. But they avenged that loss in the national title in the game that really mattered, and they beat them 33-18. Here's your roster preview going into next season. Stetson Bennett is coming back. Huge news for the Bulldogs. Your national champion quarterback is coming back for another year. Stetson Bennett, 2,800 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks last season. So, his stats were overall pretty good. There's nothing really to complain about. JT Daniels did play a little bit last season, but obviously Stetson Bennett was the better quarterback between the two, and JT Daniels is no longer with the team. He has headed off. We don't know for sure where he's committed to yet. All we know is that he's in the transfer portal and won't be with the Bulldogs next season. But Stetson Bennett, just a great season for him, and he's definitely shown. The amount of talent that was on this team really helped Stetson Bennett, I can say. He's not quite on the level as, I wouldn't say he's a top-tier quarterback in college football, or he was last season, but I definitely think that he's a quarterback that shows a lot of potential for the future, and potentially even next season. He's got the experience of a national title run now, so that definitely could help him in the future. Running back core takes a couple of huge hits. There's Zamir White's taken off. He won't be around, and James Cook is gone as well. So you got 2 key players there in the backfield with Zamir White and James Cook. Both of them combined for over 1,900 yards on the season, nearly 2,000 yards of combined yardage between the two, and 22 touchdowns as well. So this backfield was crucial for this football team. That's really what made it so tough to beat Georgia last season, was the 1-2 punch of Zamir White and James Cook. If you look at, both of them are outstanding football players and definitely have bright futures. So it's going to be tough losing both of them. But Kenny McIntosh is going to be around. He put up 570 yards and 5 touchdowns. So the backfield was insane for this team last season. You also got Kendall Milton, who also put up some good yards, and even Edwards put up over 200. So, this team in the backfield was outstanding last season, to say the least. They do return their top and receiving tight end Brock Bowers, huge player to watch out for going into next season. He put up over 900 yards and 14 touchdowns last season. So, yeah, Brock Bowers, major impact player. He's going to be potentially the top tight end in the nation next season. He put up 900 yards and he's a tight end, which is just outstanding. Those are some numbers that we saw out of Kyle Pitts, pretty similar to his back a couple of years ago out of Florida. So, yeah, Brock Bowers definitely a player to keep an eye on. Jermaine Burton is transferring away. He's transferring to Alabama of all schools, so that's going to be a tough loss here for Georgia. He was, I believe, the top in receiving for this team last season at the wide receiver position. And, of course, he got Adonai Mitchell. He's going to be coming back. Ladd McConkey is also coming back. So you got your second and third wideouts coming back for next season. However, your top receiver in Jermaine Burton is going to be taking off. Something to keep an eye on there. As for the offensive line, you lose 2 on there. You also lose 2 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker, 1 defensive back as well. So there are a few key players as well defensively that you'll be losing. But overall, this team, considering how strong of a team this team was last season, they're actually returning quite a bit, which is definitely a good look for the future. Chance at another college football playoff run in 2022, I think, is extremely likely for Georgia. I mean, there's enough talent returning for this team that I'm not too concerned about this team potentially falling off a bit. I don't know if they'll be quite as good in 2022 as they were in 21. I mean, this team was phenomenal in 2021, to say the least. So we'll see what happens there, but this team does return a lot of potential, and the depth looks great. I mean, the recruiting's been awesome for Georgia down the stretch. So, but looking at your transfer portal going into next season, Jermaine Burton is taking off to Alabama. JT Daniels is headed off somewhere. He was at USC before Georgia, so he's been all over the place. But, of course, you got Latavius Brini, a safety who is headed to Arkansas, and Amir Speed, defensive back, is going to Michigan State. So both of those players were they had some impacts on the team, but not major impacts. But otherwise, Jermaine Burton probably is the most impactful player in the transfer portal for Georgia. No major players have come in from the transfer portal yet for Georgia, but this is still being recorded in early February. So a lot of things can happen over the next few months. Recruiting-wise, Georgia's number 3 nationally, number 3 in the SEC. And 5-star recruits, you got 5. 4-star recruits, you got 15. Now let's look at the schedule for Georgia going into next season, and definitely some intriguing games. I mean, in September, you got Oregon in week 1. So, I mean, this team had a brutal game to start off last season, it looked to be, against Clemson in a neutral location. And turns out Clemson wasn't a very good team. But, of course, you got Oregon this time around, and Oregon looks excellent going into next season. So that's going to be a tough one for sure, I do think, there for the Bulldogs going up against the Ducks. Definitely an interesting one there for sure, and it's in a neutral location as well. Bulldogs actually have 2 neutral site games next season. Once again, they have to play Florida, of course, in a neutral location as well. They play Sanford at home on the 10th. You play South Carolina on the road, and then Kent State to finish out September. In October, you got Missouri on the road, Auburn at home, Vanderbilt at home, and Florida. And then you got in November, Tennessee at home, Mississippi State on the road, Kentucky on the road, then Georgia Tech at home. Looking at your first 6 games here for my somewhat projections right now. Of course, we're going to be predicting every game once we get to our full predictions in the late spring or summer. But for now, here's what I'm going to go with for Georgia's schedule. Looking at these games at a brief overview, I'm going to go with Oregon to be a yellow game, meaning 50-80% chance of Georgia winning it. So I do think it's more likely that Georgia's going to be favored, but it could definitely be a close game. Definitely a fun one coming up in week 1. Sanford, easy win. South Carolina, Spencer Rattler, of course, kind of an interesting matchup there on the road. I do think Gamecocks are going to be a good team next season. They played actually pretty well down the stretch in 2021. So going to 2022, I do think South Carolina is a team that could get 7 or 8, maybe even 9 wins next year. So Gamecocks are a team to watch out for, but I do think Georgia is probably the favorite by me right now in that game. Kent State, easy win. Missouri, I'm going to say a green game right now, meaning a pretty high chance of them winning, but just because Missouri is losing quite a bit and they're not looking too good. Auburn, of course, being at home, that's also an interesting matchup. I'm going to go with a closer game there, but I do favor Georgia as of right now, even though that could potentially be a closer game. And on to the last 6, your second half of the schedule. Vanderbilt, easy win there. Florida, of course, and always a big rivalry game there. And I'm going to go with a close one right now, but I do think that game potentially, I mean, it could go either way, but I do think Georgia is probably the winner there. Florida, of course, had a tough end of last season, so there's a lot of question marks around the Gators right now, but I'm going to keep it yellow just because it's a rivalry game. Tennessee, easy win. Mississippi State and Kentucky both on the road. I'm going to keep those as yellow games just because they're on the road, potentially tougher ones there. And Tennessee's going to be a decent football team next year, but just because it's at home for Georgia, I'm going to put it as an easy one there. And Georgia Tech, of course, isn't really a match for Georgia at this point, so I'm going to go with an easy win there against them as well. Record prediction, 10-2 to 12-0 for the Bulldogs. So once again, I do expect this team to be a national contender for sure going into next season. I would be very surprised if they weren't. But that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Georgia. I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.